like, because we've had to, as you well know, it's hard for big developers, much less small developers, to like just like get the word out about anything that they're working on. And we found, even if we've made like after Bastion, our first game did well enough for us to keep going and make a second game after that. A lot can happen in like 3 years between games, and just because you found an audience 3 years ago, it doesn't mean that they're all going to come back for the next thing you make. And I liken this to, I have an analogy around like bands and music. Like you'll meet, a friend of yours or you yourself. It's like, you may have like a favorite album or something like that, but do you really know like the whole discography of that band? Like, do you know what's the latest thing that they put out? Like, I think it's very frequent that people have a favorite album, but like have no awareness that the artists have like continued to, create more great stuff that they might like or something like that. And I think it's similar with independent developers, that it's just it's a struggle. It's a challenge to make sure that, to get the word out about what you're doing. So we've had to like go somewhat broad, between mailing lists and Discord and Twitter and all these kind of things to hopefully be able to reach our audience between games. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question. But the community building side of what we do is another like really important dimension in addition to like the game making itself.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, to add. Oh, sorry, Andrew, if you.
Nope, you're good.
So I was gonna say it's really like, and I'm kind of sitting over here mind blown at like the music comparison, because for us, I feel like it's like a completely different thing where, we've got this podcast around indie games, and so we are following developers and the things that they're doing. But when I think a little bit more in tune with like movies or other media that I perhaps enjoy without necessarily being as invested in, no, that's a really strong point. I think we're typically kind of prone to be much more invested in the product than kind of the brains and work.
Yeah. Or even it's even more like subtle than that, because you can watch movies are a great analogy. Also, there could be a whatever you see a movie, you're like, wow, like this director, this had this is an amazing, like whoever directed this, that was amazing or something like that. But you may not be aware of the next thing. Like, it's hard to like follow a director or something like that. Yeah. You have to really actively seek that out. And yeah, same with a band, like, whatever like even if you do love the creators and not just the product, it can still be difficult to actively follow the creators of something. Because it is like an active process, to have to seek that information out, see what they're up to, and like that's just a lot, but sometimes you find out that like, oh, this director of this movie you loved, like they made 2 other movies since then, why haven't you watched those? Or they made a new thing on Netflix, why haven't you watched that, etc. And you might find out about that well after the fact. So, and I'm sure from the point of view of that director, they're like, damn it, like if only everyone who loved my past work could have been aware that I just released something new, because they're, they probably gave the new thing everything they've got also.
Yeah, and what I'd like to say too is I definitely love that analogy too, because I think to some degree it can be hard for indie devs or any content creators, let's say, to understand that concept, or of like, hey, this is going great, and what happened? And I mean, I think to your guys' to Supergiant's credit, in a way, it really comes back down to this overall philosophy of communication, and understanding that, like, that analogy, that concept of, hey, you know what? Everybody's busy and everything else. It can be a real challenge, even if they're big fans of this product or several other products, to keep in line with that. So I think it's a good credit to you guys of just a way of standing out and having that open line of communication and using these channels effectively to keep people engaged. And because it's a hard thing to do and maintain on a regular basis over years, of course, let alone anything less than that, it still is. So I think that's probably like using that analogy is a good one for people to understand it, but clearly you guys understand it, and through the communication allows you to really stand out better.
Yeah, thank you. Though to your point, it's just it's always something we have to sort of treat with give a lot of care and attention to, and just respect that aspect of the process. Like, we can never ever take for granted that just because we've made something that people have enjoyed in the past, that they will be automatically interested in what we make in the future. We know that is not true. We have to work at it every single time. And I do, like, for us, like, the marketing of our games it's a big concerted effort that we put a lot into, because it's essential to our games finding an audience. And this is even with the fact that we have made games that people have enjoyed in the past. So I recognize that is a big advantage. Like, we have you called me on the show based on our past work, right? So, like, our work does precede us, and it helps, but it is not sufficient as a means of, like, promoting whatever we may want to do in the future. And, like, there's just so many good games always coming out that it's a real challenge to break through. And I'm glad that challenge exists, because it means that a lot has been done to, like, kind of democratize game development more than in years past when there were fewer games. But now, one of the consequences of the good thing that game development is more accessible than ever before is that there are tons more games, right? So marketing games, if the barrier to entry to development has decreased over time, with free tools and all sorts of stuff like that, I think, like, the marketing challenge has increased over time to some extent, at least for smaller developers.
Yeah. Well, like you said in the beginning, it's like you always have to find a way to raise that bar when the barrier to entry, that bar is always lowered.
Right. And there's just, like, extraordinarily talented developers all around the world, like, super motivated to make some incredible game, right? So games have always been intimidating in that way. Like, there's always someone better than you out there, like, not just a little bit better, but way better than you. So what are you going to do? Like, what game are you making that kind of deserves to exist, has its own identity? And how are you going to get the word out about it? Like, these have always been difficult questions, I think, and they're no more. Yeah. They're, like, they've not gotten any easier for me to answer over time. I could say that.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a great segue. And Mustafa, if you want to take it with this in terms of, like, some ways to stand out, because I mean, there's clearly some things that you're doing that you can do that. So, Mustafa, what's one good question I know we have ready for Greg here about how to stand out?
Right, absolutely. So saturation in games is probably, like, one of our most regular topics on here, and it's something we try to incorporate frequently because, as you mentioned, it is one of the rising challenges of an increasingly accessible industry. And while that overall is a great thing, it does, of course, mean that devs kind of have to shift their perspective a little bit and kind of find new ways to approach these challenges. So what would you say are some concepts and inspirations that you as a team use to stay ahead of the curve and then also kind of craft these special and meaningful experiences for people?
Yeah, it's it is tough, in a word, because we first of all, I think we have grown. We have always, I think, intuitively always been comfortable with reconciling the art and the business of game development, and understanding that those things they don't have to be in conflict. So if your goal is to make a video game that is sold for money, then there is a business component to what you are doing, and it doesn't need to be seen as like a dirty thing. It's just a reality, and like we need for our games to sell in order for us to be able to make more games, which is what we want to do. So it's very much a means to an end. We're making these things that ultimately people will have to pay money to get. In most cases, right? They could pirate them, but if everyone pirated them, we would be out of business and so on. So we have to make something that people decide is worth their money. And that can be achieved by making something that has whatever, artistic merit, right? I think people are willing to pay for worthwhile experiences. And the nice thing about independent games is they're more affordable generally than like, whatever the $60-$70 AAA games, especially once they go on, Steam fire sales and whatnot. So we try to, we make games that like speak. It has to start with what resonates with us as a team. We don't just we don't try to back solve from what is the customer, what are customers asking us for? What are they saying they want? Like, let's make that, because if you make something that is similar to something else, you're already taking a pretty big risk, because you either you have to make the best example of an existing game format, like an overwhelmingly superior example of that, or you have to make something that is sufficiently distinct. Take like a first-person shooter, for example. After the success of PUBG and Fortnite, right, there were many battle royale kind of also rans, and many of them, I'm sure us on this call, we have not even heard of many of them that came and went, right? Because it's easy to try to chase after like a trend when you see that there's like a big game type out there or something like that, but you have to make something, like I said, either it has to be overwhelmingly better than the best versions, or go do something different, find a different path. These days, one of the huge Steam hit these days is that game Valheim, which fits into one of those like popular Steam genres, right? It's like a survival crafting game, and like they're games like Rust and so on have paved the way, but I haven't played Valheim myself yet, but like there's a reason it's sitting at like a 96% positive Steam review rating. Like, it's, according to its players, it is like one of the best examples of the style of game that makes many smart improvements, feels better, looks better, etc., than a lot of games in this format. So that's an example of a game that just sort of powered through and did it better than a lot of other games were doing. But if you can't make a better game than Valheim, then watch out, making a survival crafting game, right? Because why should someone play your game instead of that game? So I think that's part of the reason our games like even have like why we value like narrative and atmosphere. It's to give our games a sense of specificity. Because if you like strip away the atmosphere and the narrative layer, then our games become just more, at least in some cases, something like Bastion. It's just like you could very disparagingly call it like a mindless hack and slash game, like many others, but with the world building and the atmosphere and the storytelling, it gained its own distinct identity that then gave it a chance to stand out. So we're just always looking for something specific, and we're not ever going for like originality for its own sake. It's just again, in that effort, we play a lot of games ourselves. We're just like, we don't want to work on something that's like an inferior version of a game that we like. We want to make something with its own. So we use that term, its own identity.